Awesome. Thanks, Ashley, for the introduction. And thanks again to our sponsors. Bill, what number is this?
10.
Close. 11. We've almost done a year of these. You believe that?
Nice.
Congratulations,
Good job.
Phil.
Good job.
Congratulations. Well, everyone, welcome everyone. This is going to be a fun night. Like Ashley said, we've got record numbers of people signing up. Well, hopefully we'll have record number attending. We have the ever popular Sue Falsone on with us tonight. Thanks, Sue.
Hi.
We'll get to you in just a
me.
minute. We'll get to you in just a second. We've got, as usual, our normals. My buddy Phil Page. Phil, say hi.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.
This is quicker than your normals, Phil. I was expecting I could run to the bathroom real quick while you were doing.
Oh,
your
did you
intro
want
like
me to
you normally
spiel
do.
it?
No,
Did
no,
you-
we don't have time.
Oh, okay.
So our next guest with us tonight is Chris Wolfe. I thought his name is Wolf the entire time, but apparently it's Wolfe. Chris Wolfe. Chris, tell everyone about yourself real quick.
Yeah, that was good as we were trying to figure out how to pronounce everyone's name. That's how we used to have landline phones. When a telemarketer would call, they would ask for, Mr. Wolfe. It's like, well, you definitely have the wrong number. You do not clearly live here. It was a quick get out. No, I'm Chris Wolfe. Live here in Nashville, Tennessee, assistant professor at Belmont University with Mike Voigt, teaching orthopedics, and being able to get on with great joint efforts and research, such as what we're talking about tonight. Physical therapist, been in practicing in Nashville 16 years, private practice now for about 5.5 years, and sports medicine.
That's good, Sue. I got it. I got it. I think he's froze. No, he's back now. He keeps freezing. Chris, you keep freezing. Yeah. Something's going on. Hey, Sue, I didn't mention we should call Phil Pagey.
Pagey,
Pagey,
Wolfe,
Mansky, Falsone, Wolfe.
Falsone.
We are
Voighty.
pronouncing the E's at the end of the name in
Voidioni.
honor of my
Voight E.
Yeah.
Campbell E.
All right. Our next guest, Mike Voidioni. Mike.
I was just changing my name. I was going to put an E on it. I feel like to be part of this damn group. No, I'm usually around in the background for these things and hassle you guys. But tonight, thanks to Sue, she brought us in. So she chose the paper for that because our guests always choose the papers. Well, that's so I appreciate Sue choosing our paper to jump in with this. Oh, look what's happening here.
Oh my gosh, look at this.
Karaoke's about to start.
Karaoke's not ready to fire up.
Karaoke's getting ready to start.
Party now.
But Sue, introduce yourself real
It's a
quick
party
before
now.
Hewitt starts singing karaoke. Can you tell everybody, in case there's someone that lives in under a rock or in a cave that doesn't know who you are, can you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Sue, and you do pronounce my last name with an E, Falsone. And yeah, been a physical therapist for longer than I like to admit, been an athletic trainer for almost as long, and a strength coach for a little bit longer than that. Owner of Structure and Function Education, as Ashley said, a proud sponsor of IGSPT, and currently working as the Director of Movement and Return to Performance for the Houston Texans.
Awesome. Congratulations. Timmy, tell everybody who you are real quick.
I'm a nobody. I just hang out with these guys to make me feel good. And
that's this group for sure, huh?
Thank you so much for letting me drag along your coattails. That's all I have to say. I love
All right. You guys ready to get this rolling?
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about the article by the senior author, Chris Wolfe, Phil Pagey, Mike Voidioni, Connor Norman, and Pete Drevich, entitled The Deceleration Index. Is it the missing link in rehab? Sue, to start out, what I'd like you to tell us, why did you pick this article?
Well, because it is the missing link in rehab, in my opinion, and it's something that we specifically focus a lot of our training and a lot of our rehabilitation on here at the Texans. And so I was thrilled to see an article about deceleration because it really is understudied. It's not well described in the literature on how to quantify it. Quite frankly, it's not really well agreed upon on how to train it. And so I just thought it was a really interesting clinical discussion surrounding what we have deemed to be really important in our training program, which is deceleration.
Cool, cool. Chris or Mike, can you describe for everybody? Because I'm sure not everybody knows what we're even talking about. I know because I've been around Mike and talked about it some. And Phil and Chris, but I'm sure everyone that's on the call or on the Zoom link not everyone knows exactly what we're talking about. Can you describe what this is talking about?
I'll take it, Chris, and I'll tee it up for you to go, because this is something we've been, and the disclaimer I'll put out to everybody that this is our editorial. It was an editorial we put together just to see what's coming down the pike. Although we have lots of data, so you're going to see more of this out there. And we've been lecturing on this for a couple of years. And really what was our driver was Tim on here tonight, talking with him. And as a person, he's getting a credit
Touchdown.
directly with it, but with some of that. But we've always talked with him about, can you predict injury, or can you at least predict risk factor? Identify risk factors. That's Phil saying it correct, because you jump on me, Phil, if I didn't say that right. And we were looking at, and the thing that the data that we'd look at, and what Tim always talks about, is the re-injury rates that we see on, and we'll just take ACL. We can apply this to the whole lower quarter. It doesn't matter. So I've always felt like we're missing these high re-injury rates. We're missing the boat somewhere. And I think one variable, I don't think this is the variable, I just think it's a variable, is looking at deceleration. And I always tell this little side story, how I was thinking about it. I was sitting there thinking about it one day, and I was watching the movie Ford versus Ferrari. And I'm sitting there watching this, and Carroll Shelby, there's a scene in this, and they're all trying to build this Ford GT and make it go faster. And they were able to do it. They built this massive Ford GT that could go incredibly fast with the horsepower. They left out one variable they didn't think about, the brakes. And they built this car and it could go super fast, but when they tried to stop it, they couldn't stop it. The brakes heated up and the person crashed in the wall and all that. And I got to thinking, in modern day sports, as we've progressed, particularly, and we can get into this a little later about individual sports, but in American football, there's a premium placed on power and a premium placed on strength and power. And if you look at combine testing and data, and we went back and was looking at a bunch of things, that the coaches, our strength coaches, are able to put bigger engines on our athletes. So we're putting Ferrari engines on a Volkswagen frame. And what ends up happening, I think that's where our breakdown is. So we started just pulling some data and looking at this, and it's very preliminary. And I'm literally, as we went on air tonight, I've got Division I universities injury data from football looking at it. And we started looking at this, and I think there's two avenues on this. And we stole the whole concept basically from Sue. Again, I'll go to you with baseball, and Dr. Andrews used to talk about this, but a person typically is not going to accelerate their arm faster than they could decelerate the arm in throwing. So we work on posterior cuff, posterior shoulder. I mean, that's you did tons of that, Sue. And so we thought, well, why does that not happen in the lower quarter? And so we do all this, we build these muscles and put these injuries. So we started deciding, well, let's start looking at some of this. And we felt like, and then I'll open it up to Chris or whoever, but we felt like you should only be able to accelerate to the same speed at which you could decelerate. If you accelerate higher than you can decelerate, we think you're certainly going to have overload when you put the brakes on. And so there's some things I think you'll get into tonight, Rob, when you're talking to me before about stuff, and ideally it's clean math. And again, I think the math can be fixed, but if you take it and sort of divide deceleration over acceleration, ideal would be 1.0. You should have a 1.0. If it's less than 1.0, that means you're accelerating more than you can decelerate. On the other hand, I've actually looked at data from soccer and Premier League soccer, and you potentially, if the number is greater than 1, then we could probably turn to our strength coaches and say, build a bigger engine. These guys are loafing or whatever, but we could probably put a bigger engine in them. So that was kind of a little quick background where we got to today and sort of drove our research. I don't know if Chris, you want to jump in on that and say anything, but that's kind of his story for the last 2 years, what we're doing in our laboratory.
Yeah, Chris or Phil, feel free to add anything you want.
Well, and if my internet connection gets sketchy again, I'll just let Mike take over. But if that's what Mike was talking to me a couple years ago when he was we were discussing just this index and really just looking at acceleration compared to deceleration. And that's when we started kind of looking at coining the phrase of an index or a ratio. And we kind of bounced that in between. And the initial thoughts is that it should be a 1. Acceleration and deceleration should be a 1. But as we start to study this a little bit more, we might find that deceleration might need to be up a little bit higher, just in order to actually provide a little bit of a buffer for when fatigue sets in. So what we may find is that if it's a 1-to-1 ratio late in the game, there may be, once fatigue sets in, we might see that actually becomes more of a detriment. So maybe we do need to train that deceleration time to be a little bit quicker. So, in times past, right now, most people are just timing this and using stopwatch for time to completion of a task, a shuttle drill or a 505 drill. And they're just seeing like how quickly can you complete the drill. But that's acceleration, deceleration is combined. And we're not really taking the two variables and separating them out. And I think we'll find as we're able to kind of put a protocol together and actually measure this and figure out the most efficient way of measuring it, we will probably find some interesting information on dominant leg versus non-dominant leg, changing of direction as well. So I think it kind of opens the floodgates a little bit for us to be able to apply this toward a lot of different things.
So Chris, you're saying right now when you measure, you're just doing like a functional test, like one of the drills, and you're measuring the entire time. So you're not able to tease out the deceleration right now.
No, not functionally, because really that would just be pretty inaccurate. Watching somebody try to accelerate and then the amount of time it takes them to decelerate. Not unless you're potentially utilizing some type of wearable that can actually pick up on it faster. But most
Are
of the
there
time,
wearables that do that now that measure deceleration?
yes, there are, or just for the time, or they're picking up like ground reaction forces, or they're picking up like peak acceleration. They're really just comparing asymmetries right and left. They haven't really shown like how much time it takes them. It can show, because there's a couple systems out there that I've utilized in the past that will just show again, but it combines acceleration and deceleration together. So you don't really know if the asymmetry is happening when they're accelerating or decelerating. And so you're like, okay, I just have to make an assumption at that point, or maybe look at video, like 2D video from that perspective.
Sue, I'm sorry,
Well, I was
Phil,
gonna
go
say
ahead.
something to Sue, Rob.
Yeah.
Sue, again, for you, because you just got done with this, or you're not necessarily done. You got actually 2 more weeks of hell with draft coming up, but looking at information. But typically, if you look at the data and how we've measured this in the past, if you take like the NFL Combine, they use the 3-cone drill, or you use a 505 drill, things like that. And then what Chris was saying is 100% correct. We look at it. Coaches have values. I actually just looked through all the combine data from this year, and from a wide receiver, you're probably like at a 6.2 seconds to alignment at 7.4 range. But the reality of it is, any of the tools we've kind of done, and Sue sort of set us up for this, the tools that we've kind of used, and we said this is deceleration, we're really looking at a composite score of everything. It's the acceleration to peak speed, if they hit peak speed, flat line, then deceleration from it. So when you look at a score of 6.2 or 7.4 on a 3-cone, you don't know if it's like I said, it's composite. Is it acceleration or deceleration? We're using 2 or 3 things. Phil, I wanted you to jump in. You're an author, but we've used, and again, we're trying to validate a lot of this. So I want to preface this from a scientific point of view, and actually it's in process right now. We've used the Tracer as one of our tools. 3D camera basically is what that is. Problem is that the frame rates are a little slower, but it does give us a person's ability to accelerate, or tells us what their acceleration is on a task, what their top speed is, and what their deceleration is. Having said that, and I'm saying this, so take it as a grain of salt, for what we're using to validate our concept and ultimately try to bring it back to the clinic in a very easy to use manner, is we're using Catapult with our data off of schools that are using that. And so some of our teams that are out there using they wear Catapult almost like 24/7, but as soon as they get to the locker room, it's on, and as soon as they take it off. And then we pull data. We're looking at Well, we can pull data from any of the drills and get that from it. Or as I said, right now, what I'm looking at is just a sort of proof of concept. We took last year's, one of the SEC schools last year's, all of their non-contact injuries. So, because contact, anything could happen. So this is for lower quarter, and I literally just got it, but we're looking at data, and Connor Norman and Matt Lucas are big help on this with this. But then, interesting enough, I thought of this. We're matching it, not because they're all the same age, they're college age. So age is not the problem. I've got a pretty good cohort, but we did for every injury we saw, we did a position match control. So if it was a wide receiver, we got a non-injured wide receiver. If it's an offensive lineman, it's offensive lineman. So we matched it all up. And we also tried to match it by year in school, so eligibility year. And I can just tell you anecdotally, it looks like the people that have suffered injuries, a majority of them have their number. If one was our key number, it's less than 1. The ones that aren't injured, it's greater than 1. Now, again, that's too clean. It's a first step. We're just starting the process, looking at it. So it's just, again, I'd take it anecdotal at best, but that's kind of what we're looking at. So we're using Catapult as our gold standard with that, which is basically an inertial motion or a device with GPS tracking. Phil, you're getting started with the 1080. Do you want to, I mean, I know you're going to play with that. There's other tools out there. I mean, you know about it. I know you haven't got it, but you're working on it, but it's another way you could measure.
Yeah, I'm going to use Noraxon stuff, and 1080. We'll do all that. Sue, what do you have that you would use out there at the Texans?
Yeah, so we have lots of items. Definitely utilizing the Catapult on a daily basis, the 1080. We've got, 4-stack, sort of all of those things. And so, yeah, it is interesting to measure. And I think I just have a clarifying question. So as you guys are talking about this ratio 1-to-1, can you just clarify what exactly are you looking at? Are you looking at like speed of acceleration over? Yeah, like tell me what is actually in the top and bottom, if you don't mind, of the
Yes,
ratio.
so the numerator or the top would be acceleration, or sorry, deceleration. I might have said it backwards earlier. It's deceleration.
It's like time to stop.
Yeah, it's your number that you get. It's a positive number that you're going to get, and it's a column on your Catapult, or it comes off of your Tracer as well. And then you have deceleration, which is basically negative acceleration. That'll be a negative number. And we put that on the bottom, deceleration is negative on top, acceleration is positive on the bottom, and we just divide it into it. So in theory, by making it be deceleration over acceleration, that would ensure, to make it the one, that you would never accelerate faster than you could decelerate. So
Right.
you guys see the math. You just start plugging numbers in with it. And so
One of the things, Sue, that I like, that I wanted to pick your brain about too. We've talked about this. It's more about the running fast and then stopping or doing these drills. I'm interested in the deceleration, acceleration. So time to stop and then pivot and do some other activity and accelerate. I think that's a whole other thing that we're looking at, and how that relates to the lower extremity, as opposed to the upper extremity could be acceleration, deceleration, but maybe in the lower extremity, it's deceleration, acceleration.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because, and this is sort of the controversy when you're talking about how do you train deceleration and what are you really looking at? Because quite frankly, if someone comes to a dead stop on the field, something bad has happened, right? Like they've either run into another human or their cleat has gotten caught and they have shifted and something really bad has happened. So to your point, Phil, like deceleration really is about re-accelerating in a new direction, right? Like that's really what it is. And so do you have the ability to slow yourself down enough and apply force in the proper direction to re-accelerate in a different cut or a different angle? And so that's really kind of what we're looking at. Number one, we're kind of just looking at what are the number of hard stops that people get. So, you can look at what's a hard decel versus something that sort of slows down. So like, are people willing to accelerate and come to a hard stop, right? Which is a tough ask, because think about how when you're driving a car, if you see a stop sign up ahead, you don't accelerate as hard as you can and then slam on the brakes.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? If you anticipate that you need to decelerate, you begin to slow down as soon as you can. So I struggle with this concept of you need to accelerate as hard as possible and then decelerate as hard as possible, because that's not a natural thing to do. And so when we really kind of look at this concept of reaccelerating or decelerating in order to reaccelerate into a new cut, if I know, so we've got so much data on people, if I know that somebody runs X amount of time in a 20-yard split, or even a 10-yard split. So let's say we've got, a 20-yard run on them, a 20-yard acceleration. I'm going to look at the first, let's say 10 yards. So if I know what they run 10 yards from a linear perspective, there's some extrapolations out there that if you do, a 45-degree cut, you should be able to be within 95% of your time in a linear direction. If you're cutting at a 90-degree angle, you should be, and I'm making up numbers now, you should be at a 90% of your 20-yard acceleration, right? Like, so if you're running 20 yards, you're just running 10 yards this way and 10 yards this way, it's still 20 yards. So what do you do linearly? And then what do you do if you do a 45, 90-degree or 135 cut? What are the normative data? What's the normative data there to say, are you within an appropriate percentage of your linear acceleration time? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
It makes perfect sense. Yeah.
And so what we're doing with that, you're correct. We probably didn't describe it right with our tracer. And then you could, well, for sure, that's a change of direction drill. So we can either go where the easiest one for us to play with this concept is a lateral agility. So you go, it's like a 3-cone drill almost. So you are coming to a stop, changing directions, because you ultimately are stopping, and then you're reaccelerating back the opposite direction. That's what we're using now. Like I said, Connor, Norman, Matt Lucas, those guys that we're looking at, we were taking injury data, and when we were looking at our players or their players with this, we're looking at game data from prior to injury, what they do, but there's no guarantee that that's a hard stop. Like you just said, there's no guarantee that's a hard stop in one direction or another. So the other thing we pulled from the data set is a lot of these big schools run their own combines prior to the season. So we can take a 505 or we could take a 3-cone drill. They're wearing their catapults. So we're pulling the data off of that. So it is a true change of direction drill that we're doing. I'll tell you the question I have on it also to throw to you guys is, even you said it, Sue, I'm not sure. Again, we have this data. We're looking purely at acceleration and deceleration numbers. The next question that we're throwing into this, and I got smart people on this tonight. Maybe we could figure this out, but I have to think body weight's going to come into play somehow with this. And in fact, it's not just body weight, it's momentum. So momentum is body weight times top speed. So fortunately on these devices, we have top speed and we have body weight already. So I have the momentum scores for all these players and seeing what they're getting. I just can't figure out how to put that into Tim will have to help us with that one. I can't put it into a formula and make it be a clean cut one anymore.
You stole the question right from me, Mike. Is it the like body mass has to alter this, right? I mean, Tim, Hewitt, doesn't it?
Yes. Always factors into the injury equation. No doubt. Body mass is a factor.
But it's got to be, it doesn't have to be a factor to some degree in this acceleration and deceleration.
No doubt velocity also plays a role. However, you have to keep in mind, as Stu was pointing out, 70-80% of these injuries are deceleration injuries.
Right.
So obviously velocity, you have to decelerate to a greater extent if you're at a higher velocity. If your body mass is higher, higher momentum, they all factor in. Those are 3 critical components to injury risk, almost always.
Is you're saying, Tim, the body, it could be mass. Well, actually, momentum would be what you're saying. It's mass times velocity. So that has to factor in somehow
always.
To this.
In every non-contact injury, momentum is going to factor in. Yes, for sure.
Hey guys, we have a couple questions. I'm going to throw you a couple of questions from some people. Yeah, real questions. Thomas Loper, I think, or it's Yeah, Loper. I was going to try to somehow throw an E on the end of it, but I'm just going to leave it. Is there a distance to decelerate, accelerate that you're using, or is it being looked at with more of a functional lens? And I don't know if he's asking that to you, Mike, Chris, and Phil, or to Sue or Tim. So anyone who wants it, I guess.
I'm not sure what the
Is
question.
there a certain distance that you're looking at when you're doing testing, or you're using your system, or
Yeah.
you're just looking at it in general? Like, is there a
Well, if
protocol?
this is the answer, I'll throw the others to jump in there to see what they think. If I'm using the clinic, obviously the clinical test we're doing, and we're playing, by the way, Sue, we're trying to coordinate force decks into this as well. We didn't say that, but we're trying to do a counter jump to see if it does it as well. So you're doing a vertical, but trying to draw a quick comparison into linear, horizontal from that. But our field that we work within on a view with the tracer is much smaller. So we have like I can't remember exactly what it is, top of my head. I think it's 5 meters, something we can go into side to side. Outside, it is what it is. Or if we're doing a 505 drill or a 3-cone drill, so 5 yards back 10, 5 yards. So we're using, when the drills are out there, we're using established performance agility drills, but instead of using a stopwatch to get our data, we're using Catapult or something else, GPS or accelerometers to get our data, more specific data. So I guess it is functional. We're running them through drills. Now, we also have data, as Sue does. We have field data during game data that we can look at. And Sue, I'll just throw this out to you, something that's kind of funny here. Just shows you how stupid I am. And Phil knows this because I had to ask Phil what was going on a little bit, is when we started looking at data, you got to understand, and Tim published a paper on this with us, I think it was just last year, maybe year before, on big data analytics and looking at things. You got to understand, on these Catapult systems, each player is generating like 10,000 data points a day. I mean, it's an enormous data set we're pulling from. And so when we first had this idea, we were working with them, Chris and I, we were looking at the data on a weekly, and they sent data to us. And I was looking at this deceleration data, and I looked at a couple of these guys and said, geez, what kind of training are you guys doing? Some of these numbers are like, they're like, hey, physiologic, you got guys stopping on a dime and doing stuff. I said, it's almost like impossible to get like a 0.001 or something like that. And so I asked Phil, yeah. And I was saying, yeah, what an idiot I was. True story. They were stopping on a dime, but it wasn't volitional. It was a wide receiver getting crushed by a linebacker or getting crushed by a defensive back. And they were going from 19 miles an hour to 0 like that. With it. So they were decelerating. So now we have to window that out and overlay video or do different things, try to window out, go back to the drills. But I think it's functional what we're doing. I don't know.
Tim, this question may be more related to you, I guess. Do you have data pertaining to the percent of re-injuries that are attributed to deceleration mechanism injury specifically? Is that, I think you said, did you say 70% or something like that?
70 and 80%. And
Okay.
the
And
answer
then
to the last question is look at the last meter, which is 3.3 feet. That's going to clue you in on the deceleration.
Hear that, Voight?
Yep.
Yep.
The
general's posting new perspectives
Coming in
505.
Oh, I love this guy,
The
man.
general Ryan Strength and Conditioning Journal 2023.
I was just looking for it. I was going to hold it up. I got it here sitting on my desk. We get all those papers looking at it.
That guy's like Chat General GPT.
Chat General GPT. Davey Zoni is what we call him now.
Davey Zoni. I
Like
like it.
Sue Falsone.
I like
Rob
it.
Mansky-Oni. Yeah. All right. Well, I think we're guys, we're like at halftime. Do we want to continue this one or do we want to move to Tim's article?
You know what?
I
You wanna
I
move
just have
on?
a quick that one question kind of had a second piece to it, and I think it would be interesting to get everyone's perspective. That said, we answered the first part, and are you using this ratio to simply highlight a deficit in what would ultimately be eccentric strength deficit, and therefore an inability to decelerate? So from that, like my kind of expanded question is, okay, if you know that they have a deficit in the ability to do this, what are all the factors that can contribute to said deficit? What do we need to train?
Well, I think the whole group, throw it out, what you guys think. I think there's probably 2 or 3 pieces to that puzzle. I think first and foremost, the easy answer would be, in my mind, if you're having a problem decelerating, there is an eccentric component of muscle contraction that needs to be addressed. So I would go down that road. But there's also skill in decelerating and control of body mass in decelerating that you have to do. So there's a skill component to this, a training component of how they put the brakes on. So I do think that's a part of it as well. But for me, I do, Sue, listen to this. When I was sort of backpedal a little bit, in very simplistic mind, and what Ashley was saying, if you're less than the 1-to-1 in my mind, then the training probably needs, from a muscle point of view, not skill yet, probably needs to be eccentric work, get them back up. If you were more than 1-to-1, you could put them on a power program. There's things we might do for that. Here's something I want to throw a wild card at you, and it's right in your wheelhouse, Sue. So you chose the article with this, but and again, anecdotal data, but I'm looking at big spreadsheets in front of me here. I told you with football, American football, I see this deficit in deceleration. I just took one team's data, had somebody send to me data, some game data from Premier League, so football and European soccer. And it's interesting, I don't find the same percentages of a deceleration decrement. If anything, the numbers are really high. So instead of, I said 1-to-1s we look for, some of these numbers are like 3.2, 3.7, 4.0, which means these people are able to decelerate incredibly quick, but they're not accelerating as fast. And this is my thought, and I want to throw it to you, this. It goes back to the commentary at the beginning. In American football, we put a huge premium on strength and power. And we spend lots of time with the athletes, with our strength coaches in the gym, building that up. You've lived highest level soccer in the world. And again, my apologies to soccer players on the call tonight with this all this, but I somehow don't have this perception that we see these soccer players spending the same amount of time in a weight room doing it that the American football does. But these guys are on the field doing drills all the time. They're doing deceleration drills. They're doing agility drills. They're working on agility. And I'm just wondering if that's not the reason why we see, again, anecdotally with data here, but why we see a higher number in European soccer players than we do in American football. Just a thought. But I think it's, if you're below, you're eccentric, you're above, work on power.
Yeah,
So,
I would
soccer.
completely agree from a muscular perspective. And yeah, I think that's really interesting from a soccer versus American football kind of perspective. You're right. And a lot of that probably has to do with mass, right? To your point earlier, is that, sure, the wide receivers, DBs, they're kind of built maybe like a little soccer player, but they're a lot taller typically too. So their lever arms are a lot longer for the majority of them, not everybody. But then, you start looking at your linemen. I mean, the mass is a huge factor in that. So that's really interesting that you're kind of seeing that in your preliminary data.
Yeah, again, I want to give thanks out to Connor Norman and Matt Lucas. Hey, Chris Wolfie, you got your little promotion cup in front of you?
Yeah.
Yeah, shameless plug. There you go.
All right, guys, we're halfway through. I think this is a perfect segue for at least a couple lines of karaoke. You're on. Hewitt, you're on. Give us something, man. Give us your best.
Periodization causes adaptation. It's making me grow.
Look, Voight's got his guitar.
No, I would jump in with you.
I'm going out
Awesome.
karaoke tonight just because of that.
Way to go.
I don't
Way to
care.
go.
If I have to drive 300 miles, I'm
That's the sweetest segue we've had in all 11 episodes of this. Way to go, Timmy.
Thank you.
All right. So we're moving to our, oh, by the way, Tim, your buddy Florian.
Where are my French and my Greek buddies?
Yeah, he was going to come on. He said, yes, I'll be there. And then he emailed me today and said, oh, hey, I just realized that's like 3 o'clock in the morning, my time. I'm not going to be able to make it. So I said, okay. Yeah. He doesn't want to get up at 3. to talk with you? What's up?
I don't get it. I wish I was more outgoing, outspoken, ridiculous.
All right,
But-
guys, our next article,
Throw it out.
periodization and anterior cruciate ligament rehabilitation, new framework versus old model, a clinical commentary by, is it Kakos?
Yeah,
Kakos?
it's Georgios or George.
Georgios?
He's really the leader. I was just following along and agreeing, and I'm an
Okay.
easygoing, agreeable guy. So I said, sure, I'll take part.
All right, well, you got to pick up their slack.
Yeah,
Okay.
whatever.
So tell us about this manuscript, just to give us a little brief rundown real quick about it.
So the idea is taking the page out of Berchansky, or I discovered this effect back in, believe it or not, when I was working with Frank Noyes. And we would do this thing every year down in Hilton Head. We're going back to the 90s.
You guys still share Christmas cards, Tim?
Yeah. So we'd have like literally, still getting $20 billion Christmas cards. Yes. So they would ask me to talk about biomechanics, right? So they kind of had an idea of my imperfections. So they would always set me in at 7 a.m. on, and this was always over Memorial Day weekend. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday, I would have the 7 a.m. lectures. And 7 a.m. Friday would be like biomechanics of gait, and 7 a.m. Saturday would be biomechanics of ACL. And then 7 a.m. Sunday would be incorporating powerlifting protocols into your PT. So, of course, like the first one, Friday morning, barely anyone shows up. Saturday, because they had Friday night, no show completely. And then Sunday morning, actually people would show up and listen, because again, we're talking 500 to 600 PTs and orthopedic surgeons. They didn't connect to the powerlifting world. So I would put that in there, and all of a sudden people would show up and people be interested and excited, completely unlike where they're given the stare on biomechanics of gait, like, what is this nerd talking about? So it's actually that's kind of the background for when George and Florian and I want to say, by the way, these guys are very cool guys. Florian Forelli, if you don't know him, if you haven't connected with him, he's the most high energy, crazy dude you'll ever meet in his life. I love him. I can't believe he's not up at 3 a.m. talking about this.
Yeah.
But so they pulled me into this. I was happy to join. And the idea is for rehab, which just paralleling power training, is that you have to constantly change. So you start out with macrocycles, which in general are around 3 months training. And then you move into mesocycles, which are in anywhere between, let's say, 2 weeks and a month, and then microcycles, which are 1 to 2 weeks, so that you force your body into constantly guessing what you're going to do next, so that you force it into adaptation. And that's the idea here. And it actually works. It definitely works in healthy individuals. The question that you threw out there, Rob, is, does this work with PT? Well, my suggestion would be, yes, start out with your physical therapist and work with your physical therapist, and you need to incorporate your athletic trainer, and then you need to incorporate your strength coach, and you need to incorporate whoever's going to follow up from there, whether that's a CSCS or whoever, to generate this constant change and adaptation that your body must react toward. And that's going to set up a situation that your body is going to optimally adapt. And that's what it's all about. And don't make again, because I will if you do.
Are you talking about doing that like after a certain time period, or you're saying from
I'm not a big believer in time period. I think time is a bad idea. So Greg Meyer, who was my student and actually well surpassed the teacher, he basically showed in a paper in AJSM that time post surgery is not a good indicator of anything. So you have to tailor it to the patient and just decide, okay, it's time. They plateaued. Let's move it. Let's change it. Let's make them adapt. And it really works. And I think you guys, I'm obviously not telling you guys something that you don't already know, but that's what this clinical commentary is about. George has this idea, and Florian, and this is what they do. And this nerd that is just hanging on to them is just getting the word out of, hey, this is important to constantly adapt your protocol to make your patient keep growing and getting better. That's the idea behind
it.
Go ahead. No, go
I
ahead.
was going to take it to Sue because I was like, I have a sneaking suspicion that this is why she picked this article, considering this sounds a heck of a lot like this continuum that I've constantly regurgitated called Bridging the Gap that I stole directly from Sue. So why don't you kind of walk us through your version of that?
Yeah, that small little book that I talked about this concept in, for sure. That's exactly why I picked this article, is because this is exactly how I practice. It can be done. It's very easily done. And I'll start off by saying the more I hang out with strength coaches, the better clinician I become. And so if you are uncomfortable, there's a couple reasons why clinicians inherently are uncomfortable sort of in this space, is because a lot of times in a clinic, you just simply don't have enough mass to train for power, to train for some of these things. And so, right, like your typical PT clinic, I mean, some of my clients, my injured clients are, RFEing like a rear foot elevated split squat at 315 with a knee injury, right? Like the amount of mass these guys are moving is incredible. And so, most clinics don't have that amount of mass. So clinicians as a whole are just really uncomfortable with that type of strength training. But when you look at that, and then you look at exactly what Tim was talking about, the periodization, I'm a massive fan of reverse engineering my rehab program. So if I know that a guy needs to be ready for August 1st to play football, then I know the couple weeks before that, they need to be doing decision-making type change of direction things on the field. They need to be doing combining linear motion and acceleration, potentially high velocity, all of those things on the field, which means the couple weeks before that, they need to be doing programmed change of direction, whatever. Week before that, they need to be doing high-speed yards. They need to be doing accelerations. We need to build that up, which means they need to have enough strength, which means they have to have enough power in order to express those things. So the weeks leading to that, they need to have an enough work capacity. And so the weeks before we start a work capacity phase within the weight room, we need to make sure that range of motion and swelling and all of those things are under control. And so I just reverse engineer from the day they need to be back, exactly as Tim said, from a mesocycle perspective. So, okay, if they need to return to football, before that, we need to be in elastic phase, an elastic microcycle. And the week, 3 weeks leading up to that, they need to be in explosive phase. The weeks leading up to that, they need to be, in a absolute strength phase. The weeks leading up to that, they might need to be in work capacity. And so you're absolutely right. You're altering your load, your tempo, your time under tension, and your set and rep scheme based on the phase that you are in. And that phase basically changes every 3 to 4 weeks and building upon each other as they return to more athletic movement. And then when you reverse engineer that, now I know exactly what I need to do today in the athletic training room, because by Friday this week, I know if they don't have full range of motion, they're not going to meet their goal for next week. And so I already know 1 week into the rehab process, if they're behind, if they're ahead of schedule, if they're on, wherever they are. And that way, nobody is surprised. Anywhere from the front office to the athlete isn't surprised when they're behind schedule, if they're ahead of schedule, whatever it may be, because we have weekly short-term goals that we are attaining within that microcycle or that mesocycle in order to return them back to football. So this is exactly how I program every single injury, not just ACLs, which is why the article was so attractive to me to talk about tonight.
God, you're beautiful. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's uncomfortable if you don't understand strength and conditioning principles. And so I encourage clinicians all the time to hang out with strength coaches. This is what I'm making it sound fairly simple. This is really hard.
More complicated, yeah.
It's way more complicated than I'm making it sound. I had a meeting today with legitimately 5 people, 2 strength coaches, 1 sports scientist, 2 physical therapists, and an athletic trainer to go over every single person's program. It takes a lot of time, a lot of communication, and a lot of thought process to go into planning like this. And I know that's resources that a lot of people don't have. But if you are partnering with a strength coach or you've got a great personal trainer in your area, hang out with them and learn some of these principles. Get comfortable prescribing 6 sets of 1 versus 3 sets of 10, right? We've got to get comfortable. I mean, I love 3 sets of 10. Physical therapy was my first thing, right? Oh, 3 sets. I know how to load it. I know how to move it. I can coach it. Feels so good. If it's Friday, I go 2 sets of 12. I mean, it's really, I love that set rep scheme, right? So it's uncomfortable. I'm still uncomfortable in the weight room with the amount of mass and doing 10 sets of 3. Or whatever it may be, right? And so as clinicians, we've got to get more comfortable because really our rehabilitation is a regression of the performance program. So if I don't understand the strength and conditioning program or the performance program, my rehab isn't going to be able to bridge that gap to performance on the field, right? No shameless plug intended there, but. Yeah.
You should shameless plug away. I would encourage anyone who doesn't have your book to get your book.
I'm sorry, do you have another question, Ashley?
No, go.
So I'm just going to ask, so you said you kind of reverse engineer it from when you need them to be back. If you had to just guess, what percentage of time does this work out perfect? And how often does it, it just doesn't work because they can't do the cycle for as long as you need, or they're not ready for it yet they're not ready when you want them to be ready. So their start date that you had set in the future gets pushed back. Does that happen a lot? Does it happen once in a while?
Not to sound overly arrogant, it doesn't happen a ton because you can sometimes make stuff up within your mesocycle. So sometimes I might need, we may have planned out 3 weeks of work capacity. And then the next 3-week mesocycle might be a little bit more relative strength or absolute strength phase, or an so basically like working through, we believe in a lot of triphasic training. So we may have an eccentric phase of training there and then kind of move more into an isometric and then more of a power phase. And so when we're in these earlier stages, if I need to take an extra week or 2, I can do that, knowing that I can kind of rob from the elastic or explosive phases a little bit on later on. And then I can, luckily, your coaching staff needs to be on board that maybe they're going to be a little bit more limited in practice and kind of need a few more reps on that end. So we can sometimes make up time on the back end, depending what physical quality we're trying to train. So I'm not saying it works out perfectly all the time by any means. There's lots of reasons why rehab goes sideways, as we all know. But with proper planning, you can make adjustments, and you're looking at this stuff every week, making adjustments and saying, oh, we need an extra week in this phase, or, we're going to be behind. And then that's a discussion with everybody, right? From the athlete to the physician to whatever, like, hey, this isn't going right. We need to take a step back. You're not going to be ready.
Yeah. And you're not talking tiny short periods anyway. You're talking relatively long periods of time that this whole session goes. So yeah.
Yeah. And these are for our long-term rehabs, right? Like
Yeah,
a guy
yeah.
who strains his hamstring and he's out for 3 weeks, right? Like that's a whole different planning.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's these longer term post-surgical rehabs that we will really map that out. And I mean, we're revisiting it every 3 to 4 weeks to say, okay, are we still on plan? Are we still on task? What do we need to adjust? And so if
Good.
their joints being reactive or whatever, then yeah, we might have to be doing more modalities or more, nutrition, those sorts of things, like what's going on, why is the joint being reactive, why is the tissue, not doing well, or whatever it may be. So we're absolutely 100% of the time adjusting, but it can work out the majority of the time because you're making good decisions along the way. And when things
the whole
start to
time
go south, you're on it right away and making the adjustment to the schedule.
Yeah. Sue, someone, Erin Lee posted a question here. She's kind of hitting on the hot topic of the neurocognitive rehab. And her question is, could you touch on periodization with regards to neurocognitive side, I'm assuming, of rehab, and how you can incorporate that during the rehab?
Yeah, great question. And I know Mike can speak to this a bit as well too. And so can Tim. Obviously, everybody on this call can speak to that too. It's something that we are focusing on more this year than last year, to really incorporate that piece within the rehabilitation process. We absolutely know that decision making is something that needs to be happening on the field with movement, right? There's no such thing as perfect movement. I'm a firm believer in the dynamic systems theory. The organism is going to perform the task based on the health of the organism, the task that's being performed, and the environment in which it's being performed in. So if we're not properly manipulating all of those things and keeping those things in mind, it's going to be difficult. And so there's no such thing as perfect movement. The body's going to make decisions depending on the task and the environment. So, and the health of the organism. So the neurocognitive piece is massive. We have instituted it more in the end stages of our rehab right now and are working on incorporating those things much earlier on in the rehab process, as I think they should be. So I'm sure other people on the call have some thoughts there too, because I think those
Tim or
things
Mike,
can be
you guys-
periodized within the program as well.
Bill, you want to jump in? I mean, we just had a paper you helped with, and it's kind of in the realm of the research that Chris, you and I are doing, but from Bob Mangine, when he was working on that neurocognitive. You want to just talk to that, what we're working on?
Yeah, amazing stuff that we're looking at is this kind of concept of combining the EEG with the functional parameters that we're measuring, like a squat, jump, and all these physiologic parameters that we're real-time assessing at the same time we're measuring EEG. And so working with Bob Mangine, University of Cincinnati, combining with the stuff we're doing with Tulane University, we're trying to get together and look at how do these changes occur during rehabilitation. And as a matter of fact, I think it was in this journal issue, Bob published a case study of an ACL rehab in a lacrosse player that they had actually done this, what they call qualitative EEG, to look at these actual measurements of the different brain waves that are occurring and the changes in the activity in different parts of the brain as that athlete rehabilitated. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they did three different points in the rehabilitation, right after the injury, and then a couple of months, and then a few months after that. And and Bob and I and Andre have a call every week, and what we're talking about is collaborating on this study and looking at, can we do a better job of using the data, using this qualitative EEG, to actually understand when that athlete is ready to return to play. Because physiologically, we may see great scores in all the performance tests, but is the brain actually ready to go? And that's what we're actually looking at. So it's pretty exciting stuff.
That's how, you know what, when you were Mike was talking about what factors come to play in whether how quick someone decelerates and all of that stuff. I was thinking that too. Is the person, are they mentally ready to decelerate at top speed? So I mean, physically they may be ready, but in their mind, do they feel like they can?
Out there, Rob. Yeah. I mean, we can put this on individuals, and look at their reactions and it's just so exciting where we are right now with research.
And I would
Nice.
add that everything that Sue and Mike and Phil said is the brain, the neurocognitive aspect is in as much need of periodization as the neuromuscular physical aspect of the body. Absolutely. It's going to benefit exponentially from that approach.
Mhm. Yeah, and right down to like different types of vision training and those sorts of things, right? Because we know if the body has an injury, I'm going to use extreme language, but like that the brain can alter how it's dealing with what's happening with that side of the body. So are they even tracking right? Are they, we're looking at all this jump data and 1080 data and those sorts of things. And I always raise my hand and I'm like, we're making a massive assumption that they're even standing symmetrically and that they're even, accepting weight and like wanting to even acknowledge that side of their body. So, again, trying to incorporate some of these brain pieces in much earlier into rehab, beyond the patient-reported outcome measures and those sorts of things that also, you can use the kinesiophobia, PROs and those sorts of things. But to now, like Phil, that's really exciting that you're able to sort of measure some of these things beyond just sort of objectifying their subjective of being afraid or not, not feeling ready to go, that we can kind of see that objectively, I think is super exciting. And the neurocognitive piece is definitely something that we're incorporating more and learning more about. And because it is, at the end of the day, your brain is what dictates. We like to say we're orthopedic biomechanical therapists, but at the end of the day, it's all about the nervous system, which I wish I would have realized that in grad
Paid
school.
attention a little sooner.
Neuro,
we're all there, I think.
neuro
Yeah.
and P's.
You're all a bunch of dictators.
All right, guys, I tell you what, every time we do this, I Phil has told me this before. He feels kind of the same way, that every time we do these things, it's like exciting. It's like you get rejuvenated, I guess, on all the stuff that people are doing, all the research that people are looking at, reading and talking about on this podcast or episode, whatever we're calling this thing that we're doing now. It's just unbelievable, and this definitely is no different. I feel the same today. So. And we're running out of time. I think we're just about to the end, but so I want to tell everybody thank you, especially Sue Falsone, for joining us. And does anybody have any?
Rob,
some last-
we have to give kudos. This was the highest attendance in 11
It is.
webinars.
Yeah.
And
Let's keep it moving. Let's keep
Ashley,
it rolling.
and of course, Ashley is Namaste, Ashley, for doing all of this.
Well, I'm glad I could be here tonight because I originally wasn't going to be able to because my puppy was
That's
starting
right.
puppy class and it got canceled this morning. And so I was like,
Oh no.
I don't have to miss it. So
But your dog's going to
week.
probably have messes and bark all
Yeah,
night.
I mean, he's going to keep biting my hand to death,
Yeah,
but that's fine.
Yeah, that's the downfall of being able to be here. Yeah,
But
darn it. Okay.
yeah, again, huge thanks to everyone for being on here. I did put the link to Amazon for Sue's book. Someone had asked in the Q&A in the chat. So I put the link to her Bridging the Gap book in there. Again, this is not like a shameless plug. I really highly encourage people to do it. Conversations like this, like we all kind of geek out on it, and I'm geeking out as we're doing it, but it also gives me a little bit of anxiety of like, God, I have so much I need to be doing differently and better and all of that. And if I could give anyone any advice that's feeling that way, like honestly, read Sue's book. She did a great job of making it.
I have it on the shelf behind me.
It's just very it's very reader friendly, no matter what your profession is in the whole gamut of rehab. So if you need a place to start, I would strongly encourage you to start there. It's wonderful. Appreciate it. And writing a book, as those almost pretty much everyone on this panel knows, writing a book is not an easy or fun task. So props to you for doing that, Sue, and really appreciate you being on here and driving record attendance. We have some people raising their hand. If you want to throw I don't know what y'all need, but please put it in the chat if you need anything. We can certainly answer a question. But yeah, other than that, reminders for those that popped on maybe a little late, you will get a CEU certificate to your email in the next 24 hours. This will be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel, and Mary will be sending out the replay of it for everyone. You can always reach out to me with any questions or concerns. again, Sue's book, Structure and Function, go to a course, dry needling. And you also have some offerings for some fascial manipulation stuff too, right?
Yeah, we've got our fascial manipulation class that we partner with the Stecos on, which is just a wonderful, I mean, at this stage in my career, very little is practice changing, and fascial manip has been practice changing for me from a manual therapy skill. And then we also have joint manipulation classes that we have started within the last 3 months as well. And so those are running this year and really great if you need to brush up or learn manipulation skills. So joint manipulation. So, yep.
Well, thank you, Sue.
Awesome.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for having me
You're
on.
welcome.
This was
Thanks for
super
joining.
fun.
Great
Okay.
to see
Good night.